Hello everybody and welcome. I'm Christo and this is another MEIOU and Taxes 3.0 basic concepts video. The time has finally come. I now know enough to tell you about trade. Trade is an incredibly enhanced mechanic in 3.0. There's so much new stuff. There is, as you probably know at least to some degree now, a globally realized network of goods. Trade and industry are very much two halves of the same coin. Industry is how goods are made. Trade is how goods are moved. Today we're going to talk about trade. One of my upcoming videos will be about industry, when I have a bit of a better grasp on that. So, the first thing we're going to do, basically, is go through a bunch of concepts around trade. And then once I've explained all of the concepts to you, I can tell you how the trade system actually functions, how it literally takes place. So the first concept you need to know is sectors. Sectors are really simple. One sector is all of the provinces one nation owns within a single node. So, for example, in the Far East node, there's one sector made up of these provinces that are all the provinces that we own within the node. There's another sector made up of all of the provinces that Korea owns within the node. There's another sector that's made up of all the provinces that whoever this is, Bagrud owns within the node, and so on. Sectors are the units, the agents in trade. So what a sector does is it collects all of the goods from its province into itself, and then it sells them, either back to other parts of the province, or internationally to other sectors. Cool. Nice and simple. Sectors can only trade with each other under certain conditions. Firstly, there has to be a merchant in a sector for it to be eligible to trade with other sectors. There are two exceptions. One is your capital node, that does not have to have a merchant in it. And secondly, a sector can always trade without a merchant with other sectors in the same node. So this sector here and this sector here can trade even if there's no merchant here. Next, there is another thing that's required for them to do inter-sector trade, which is to have at least one center of trade. Your sector must have at least one center of trade in order to trade between different sectors. But there are more restrictions. So let's take a zoom out here for a moment and let me turn on my display capture so that I can show you with some annotation. So here we have a number of sectors. Let's go here, 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 and here. And this might not be the case, but don't worry about it. Let's just assume these are all connected like this, okay? We own land and therefore have a sector in this one, this one, this one, but not this one and not this one. This is just an example. That's not actually the case in this game. We have a merchant in all of these sectors. I know, I'm really good at drawing. Merchant, 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 merchant. This sector can trade with this sector. They both have merchants, and they're both sectors, so they can trade with each other. Likewise, this node can also trade with this node. The goods move from here to here to here, and a fee is paid here. We'll talk about that more in a second. But this node can buy from this node, because again, we have a chain of merchants and a chain of sectors. This node can also buy from this node, even though we do not have a sector, because it's adjacent to somewhere we do have a sector. So this sector here gives us access to the nodes that are bordering, even though it doesn't have a sector. Now here, we have a merchant, but we don't have a sector. This node cannot buy from this node. If this node over here buys from this one, you pay a fee here and a fee here. So you end up paying more fees. That is the basics of how goods are allowed to move, and this is why conquering certain provinces to give yourself sectors along a trade route is required to enable you to bring goods back. Remember, you have to have merchants here, so if there was no merchant here, this node can no longer trade with this node. Nice and simple. Should be relatively easy to understand. Let me just switch back off my display capture. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. It's pretty simple, but sector, all your provinces in a node. Sectors trade along the normal trade. Oh yes, that's worth mentioning. Sectors trade along the vanilla trade paths. There used to be exceptions to that. There are no longer. They always trade along the vanilla trade paths, but the trade paths are bi-directional. There's no directional limit. The fee you pay starts at 0.8% of the value of the trade, and it increases the further away you're buying. So I believe, I'm not totally certain of this, but I believe if this node is buying from this one, you pay a 0.8 fee here. If this node is buying from this node, I think you pay a 1.6% fee here and here, but it's possible you just pay the 0.8 fee twice. Not totally certain on that one. Yes, you have to have a center of trade to do intersector trade, and centers of trade are obtained by having lots of trade power and a certain portion of the node's trade power in a specific province. The higher proportion of the node's trade power that one province has, the less trade power production you need to get a higher level center of trade. Centers of trade are how you get merchants. As you can see, a minor center of trade gives you 0.2 merchants, a major center of trade gives you 1.5, and a dominant center of trade gives you 3. So it's really important to try and get centers of trade so you can get merchants from them. So, you know how to make your sectors reach further? Do that. It is always a good thing. It is a strictly good thing to expand your market access, because market access is not bi-directional. Just because my sector has increased its reach to a whole bunch of other places doesn't mean other places have had their reach increased to include my sector. And your sectors will trade when it's in their interest, meaning that it does not hurt your sector to have more access to other nodes. No one's going to start undercutting you or forcing you to drive up prices or anything like that. More sector access is always a good thing, and it should be a heavy goal within essentially all of your games. Sectors maintain a stockpile of goods, and each time a round of trade happens, because trade happens in cycles, they aim to move towards a target quantity of each of the 12 goods in that stockpile. We'll talk more about the trade window in a minute, but they're aiming to get each of these 12 goods to a specific target. If they're below the target quantity of a certain good at the beginning of the cycle, they will raise the amount they're willing to pay for it because they feel like they have a shortage, and so they will raise it. If they're above the target, they will decrease the amount they're willing to pay for it. And therefore supply affects price, and it's so freaking cool. The size of the stockpile they choose to maintain is based on their success in selling that good. If they're selling more and more of it, they will stockpile more and more of it. If the amount they're selling is going down, they will stockpile less of it. So, which sectors can you trade with? Firstly, they have to be in range. Remember, that has nothing to do with trade range as defined here. It's to do with that connectingness, to do with having centers of trade to make sure they can all engage in intersector trade, and in having merchants placed. Next, you cannot trade with a nation with which you are at war. Next, you cannot trade with a nation which is embargoing you or which you are embargoing. Next, you cannot trade with a nation where the relations are, in either direction, lower than 150. In the current alpha, that's bugged, but that will be the case. There is also, the trade range, which is, again, determined by having merchants and having sectors. Now, as we've said, trade happens in rounds, but it's not just that everyone buys goods simultaneously. Trade happens in order. Nations get to take turns, sectors rather, get to take turns in who gets to trade when. You want to trade first, because let's say I'm this sector and these are two other people's sectors, and all of us want to buy from something up here. If we trade first, we're going to buy the cheapest goods, which will then be gone, and someone else will need to buy more expensive goods, and we're going to sell to the highest bidders. And then once the highest bidders are satisfied, someone else might end up selling to a lower bidder. So you want to trade first. You can see how well your sector is doing in terms of its sector score, which determines how fast it trades, by looking at this show sector centers thing. If you hover over the question mark, we can see that this is the sector center. And then if we look at the trade tooltip, we can see down at the bottom there, above province assistance economy, it has 12.5 sector score. That's not bad for this stage of the game. So this nation is trading at a score of 12. Sorry, this sector is trading at a score of 12.5, as is this one. But if you were to look around the world, there will be a range of different scores. You want to try and raise your sector score, if at all possible. In the future, the sector score will be displayed in the sector tooltip, as opposed to the trade tooltip. The sector tooltip is quite new, and so it's under construction. The things that increase your sector score are the number of merchants the country has, the commerce output in the sector, that's the thing that's produced by the commerce industry, which we don't actually have any of in that particular province, so let's go here instead. Commerce output, just there. Some ideas increase it, and having commercialism embraced also increases it. So try and increase your sector score, and the main way you can influence that is investing in commerce industry and by increasing the number of merchants that your nation has. Next, tariffs. When goods are traded, the nation that they're in applies tariffs to them. This is reduced by the local smuggling rate. The smuggling rate is increased by having particularly high tariffs, and it is decreased by a combination of local autonomy and state reach. So go for low autonomy and high state reach to be able to successfully apply your tariffs. High tariffs effectively make your goods more expensive to other sectors, which will discourage them buying from you rather than someone else who might have high tariffs. Tariffs income requires no manner to collect and can be seen on the second page of the provincial administration, right down there at the bottom. Okay, so now we understand all of the concepts you need to grasp what's going on. Let's talk about the actual sequence of events so you can try and get a good overview on how trade works. First, subsistence trade happens. If you look at the trade tooltip, you can see at the bottom on the first page, province subsistence economy. It's 55.4%. That means of all the goods made in this province, 55.4% of them will only be sold locally. They will not be sent to the sector to engage in all of that trade we've just talked about. They'll just be handed around within this one province. That's obviously quite limiting, so that's something you might want to try and work to reduce. Next, everything in the sector that doesn't go into the subsistence economy is sold to the sector itself if the sector wants to buy it. If the sector does not want to buy it, then it is wasted. And you can see how much goods are wasted on the sector tooltip. You can see that here, for example, 11.44 units of naval goods are being wasted because the sector just doesn't want to buy them from the local industries. Perhaps it's finding better prices elsewhere. Perhaps there's just too much naval stuff being produced in general, and there's just a needless quantity being generated. Next, the industries, property, infrastructure, and population present in this sector, those are the 4 different things that need goods, buy those goods. They go to the sector, which has just bought all of the stuff, and they say, here's what I need. And the sector will go, okay, here's the price. And they'll buy all they can afford. Next, the sector engages in inter-sector trade. So it's done all the internal buying and selling, and now it goes to other sectors, and it seeks to achieve its optimum stockpile level. It will do that by looking at all of the places it has access to and saying, okay, where are the best prices for the goods I want to buy, and where are the best prices for the goods I want to sell? It will seek to get the best bang for its buck by selling its goods in the places where they will have the highest price and selling the amount of goods that it thinks will end up getting it the best price. Finally, at the end of the cycle, 12.5% of all remaining stockpiled goods are lost, and the cycle starts all over again. I hope that makes sense. That's the fundamental process. Subsistence trade, local goods being bought, local goods being sold, inter-sector trade, some goods wasted, repeat the cycle. That is the basic principles of trade. There is a lot more detail that you can see on the prices and stockpile of particular goods in various of these trade tooltips, as well as which locals are demanding which goods and what quantities. You can also use the sector tooltip to learn more about all kinds of things. Are you buying and selling domestically or internationally? What's your trade balance? How much money are you making as an intermediary? Which goods are you having to import from other sectors, and all of that. There's lots more details to be had in here, and you're very capable of going and reading all of that yourself. It's worth mentioning, of course, that because intersector trade happens last, it's actually in the next cycle that your locals have the opportunity to buy that international goods stuff. Okay, there you go. That, in under 15 minutes, is how trade works in MEIOU and taxes. There'll likely be an advanced trade tutorial coming after this. One thing we didn't touch on is how delicacies and exotics are two particular goods, where exotics are mostly produced in the East and delicacies in Europe, which creates this whole reason for each to try and open up the other market and things like that. There's lots of extra nuance that we'll definitely go into in the future, but I hope this was helpful at giving you a basic understanding of how trade functions in MEIOU and taxes. We will do a video probably next, but maybe the one after next, on industry, which is how all those goods are actually produced. Thank you ever so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.